All right. It looks like it is just 1 minute past 3 o'clock Eastern time. So we're going to go ahead and get started as people continue to trickle in. But I just want to say hello to everyone who's here already, and thank you all so much for joining us today. We're really excited to have you here. My name is Kayla Ripple, and I'm a senior associate with the Lenfest Ocean Program. To share a little bit more about who we are and what we do, I have a quick video I'd like to show you, and then we'll dive in. So let me pull that up really quick for everyone.
We used to think about the oceans as boundless, capable of producing limitless amounts of food and resources. But today we understand that that's not the case. All species in the ocean are interconnected. What we do to one species impacts other areas. The Lenfest Ocean Program is a science grant-making program based at the Pew Charitable Trusts. Its mission is to work alongside scientists and managers to identify the most pressing questions facing the coastal and marine environment, and to fund scientific research projects to fill those information gaps. We tackle fisheries issues around the world on how to create sustainable catches. We are looking at how climate is impacting species movements in the United States and also around the world, and what impact that might have on coastal communities. Sharing research results and engaging with stakeholders is what sets the Lenfest Ocean Program apart. Together, that group of individuals can bring their expertise to best answer the questions facing the marine environment. The Lenfest Ocean Program will continue to build upon these collaborations and support useful and usable science that leads to evidence-based decision-making to support healthy oceans, the planet, and our future.
All right, let me put up that intro slide again so you have my contact information. Here we go. Great. And like the video mentioned, you can learn more about the Lenfest Ocean Program and the projects we fund by visiting lenfestocean.org. And while you're there, you can also sign up for our newsletter. This is a really great way to receive updates on new projects and results as they come out. Another way to receive updates or interact with us on a more personal level is to follow us on Twitter at LenfestOcean. In fact, we'll be live tweeting this webinar today, so feel free to join the conversation there. You can retweet us or simply follow along using the hashtag LOPwebinar. So joining us for today's webinar is Dr. Yong Chen and Dr. Yunzhou Li from Stonybrook University. They'll be sharing insight on their new project to understand socio-ecological vulnerability of China's fisheries to climate change. The project is part of a growing body of work that the Lenfest Ocean Program is investing in to understand management challenges and solutions for climate impacts on fisheries. Much of this work currently focuses on climate and fisheries challenges in the US. So for us, we're excited to collaborate with Drs. Chen and Li to expand this work on an international scale, specifically for a country that contributes largely to and is very important for global fisheries. This project is just starting, so rather than simply sharing results at the end of the project with you, we want to give you some context on the issue at the beginning of the project. So we hope this helps increase transparency and strengthens the research throughout the life of the project so that it and its final results are useful to stakeholders and managers at the end. So I'll be asking the researchers a few questions about their project, and they've prepared some slides to share the details. If you have additional questions during their presentation, we encourage you to type those into the Q&A box as we go along. Depending on the time, I can read your questions aloud for the researchers to answer. And if we don't get to them during the presentation, we save time at the end for a final Q&A, and I can read your questions aloud then. Also during the presentation, if you have a comment or a link to a useful resource, for example, a recent paper or a website that relates to the topic the researchers are discussing, or even the name of an organization that would be good for the researchers to connect with, we encourage you to type that into the chat box. So it's my hope that this can sort of be an interactive place for all of us during the webinar, and a place where you can connect more closely with Yong and Yunzhou on their project, as well as suggest information that would be useful to know as the project progresses. My colleague Emily Knight will also be posting in the chat box with links to this project and the resources that Yong and Yunzhou mentioned during their presentation. So keep an eye out there for those. And finally, I have just a few logistical points that I want to make about the webinar. So all attendees are muted to prevent any feedback or echoes during the webinar. But just a reminder that we do want to hear from you. So please type your questions in the Q&A box and your comments or suggestions in the chat box. This webinar is being recorded. A link to the recording will be made available shortly afterwards. And I'll share this link with the project distribution list. So if you're not on that list or unsure if you are, you can email me at kripple@lenfestocean.org, which is on the slide in front of you. And I'll be sure to add you to that list. And lastly, closed captioning is enabled for this webinar. So if you would like to use closed captions and don't already see them at the bottom of your screen, just click the CC button at the bottom of the Zoom window to turn them on. Alternatively, if they're on and you don't want to see them, just click the CC button again and they'll turn off. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Yunzhou, you should be able to share yours now. Perfect.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yep. Yeah, that looks great. So why don't I get started with the first question? And Yong, this is going to be directed towards you. We'll get into the details of the research project soon, but I was wondering if you could just set the stage for us right now. What does fisheries management in China look like? Are they seeing impacts of climate change already? Are they anticipating climate impacts in the future? And if so, what are these specific management needs in order to advance decision-making to address these impacts?
Thank you, Kayla, for a very nice introduction and also those questions to kick off this webinar. And I also want to thank you all for attending this webinar on the socio-ecological vulnerability of China's domestic fisheries to climate change. So we're going to divide it into this talk into 4 parts. And we're going to start with our presentation with, try to address Kayla's question, try to present some background information about China's fisheries and how it has evolved and challenges it faces on climate change and anthropogenic stressors. So China, of course, most of you know, that is the world's largest seafood producer, producing roughly 15% of the world reported capture fisheries production in 2018 based on FAO data. It is also our major importer, exporter of seafood. Because of its size, the Chinese fisheries management can decisively influence global seafood trade, food security, and marine conservation. So capture fisheries also play a very significant role socially and economically in China, and employing directly, indirectly, over 17 million people. And although a lot of effort has been put into improving management, especially since the year 2000, anthropogenic stressors such as overfishing, coastal development, and pollution continue putting a lot of stress, pressure on fish populations, resulting a larger proportion of fish stocks being overfished or even collapsed. Marine fisheries catch mainly consists of a small, short-lived and low-value species with a young age at maturity and in very low trophic levels. So next slide. So this release, I first of all apologize the busy slides here, but there's a lot of information here. This raises some very interesting questions. How did China's fisheries get to where it is now, and where to go next? So this diagram actually is from a paper we published in Fish and Fisheries in 2020. We studied the changes in China's fisheries management objectives since 1949, and then divided China's fisheries development into 4 time periods. For economic growth from 1949 to 1978, realizing needs for conservation from 1979 to 1999, and starting to consider balance the socio-economic conservation needs from 2000 to 2015, and finally starting to highlight the importance of a conservation after 2015. So each phase has a very different management measures developed, try to achieve the goal set for that phase. And from maximizing catch in 1951 and the zero growth in catch in 1999 to controlling effort and the catch and eco-civilization policies in the 2000s. And this is if you want to get more information, you can read this paper. Next slide. So significant changes have taken place in China's fisheries management priorities, policies, and regulations recently. This slide shows some key milestone events in recent fisheries management reform. National eco-civilizations was initialized in 2007. Strategic plan for improving marine fisheries started in 2016. And China also started to include output control in management system, developing pilot TAC projects, and started to develop relevant programs for data collection, stakeholder engagement, monitoring, and enforcement in some of the TAC pilot projects. And the seasonal and area closures, stocking program, artificial habitat, and the marine ranching have also been widely used in fisheries management in China. So several government white papers and reports, already considered the potential impact of climate change on the marine ecosystem and highlight the importance of considering climate change in management, as you can see from some of the quotes included in this slide. However, next slide, Yunzhou. However, I think this is largely focused on a marine environment, not on fisheries. It appears that there is a disconnection between increasing evidence, which I'm going to show you next few slides, on climate change induced socio-ecological impacts and the development of fisheries management policies. So many studies have suggested that China's coastal waters have been warming. This left figure shows increase in sea surface water temperature from 1985 to 2018. So the evidence is very obvious here. The mid figure show you marine heat waves occurring in 2020, and coast storms events also become more frequent, and you also see coral bleaching, pretty common. Next slide. So various marine climatic indices here also indicate larger changes in marine ecosystem induced by climate change. Many pelagic and short-lived species, which are critical to China's fisheries, responded to those changes in different ways, resulting in larger changes in fisheries production from year to year. It is also clear that the different species respond change differently, with some of them increasing and others decreasing. So this slide shows you some predictions on the different climate change scenarios. So it's predicted that many of those species very important pelagic species will change their stock areas in responding to climatic changes. Some will expand it, constrict, or be stable in their distributions. So it's also not the change also is not a uniform. It's a varied over along the coast. Next slide. So to incorporate climate change in fisheries management, we believe there remains a larger knowledge gap in China's fisheries management. We're specifically interested in the following 4 questions in this research project. How climate change affects China's fisheries socio-ecological system. What are the most vulnerable species, regions, and fisheries? And how effective are current fisheries management and conservation measures in changing climate? And what strategies should it be prioritized to improve fisheries adaptation? So with those questions in mind, we would like to achieve the following 3 overarching goals in this project. The first one is we will examine the socio-ecological vulnerability of China's domestic fisheries to climate change. And the second goal would be to develop guidelines with a suite of available solution and adaptation strategy. And finally, we would like to engage with the stakeholders to inform climate-ready fisheries management in China. So Yunzhou will talk about it detailed about the project in a few minutes, but before her talk, I would like to introduce our project advisory committee. And we are very fortunate to be able to convince this 6 excellent scientists to advise this project. And the committee consists of 3 scientists from the US, Dr. Kristen Kleisner of Environmental Defense Fund, and Dr. Jason Link. I think I saw his name. I think he's attending this seminar now from NOAA Fisheries, and Dr. Keith Mills from Gulf Maine Research Institute. 3 Chinese scientists include Dr. Du Fiyan from South China Sea Fisheries Research Institute, Chinese Academy of Fisheries Science, equivalent to NOAA Fisheries, the US, and Dr. Lin Yiping from Ocean University, China, and Dr. Tang Yi from Shanghai Ocean University. So all of those are scientists who have a significant experience in fisheries management and climate change. All 3 Chinese scientists have a significant experience in engaging with stakeholders and policymakers in China's fisheries management. Next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit about China's decision-making process in fisheries management. Next slide, Yunzhou. So this, again, apologize for the busy slides here. A lot of information here, but I'm just go through very quickly. But this will be my last slide to lay out the background information for this project. This slide shows you 2 examples. Actually, you can see A in the top one and the bottom, A and B. How a decision is made in China's fisheries management. The top panel is about a decision-making process for setting up a target for controlling fish effort and catch. It is a top-down process with the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs, which is a central government organization, central government ministry responsible for fisheries management in China. They started the process, and the provincial and the city, county level agencies providing feedback for revisions, and for small size fishing fleet, the provincial level of agency actually is responsible for developing those targets. And as you can see in the diagram, if you look very hardly, the small fund, and there are some expert input in the process, but in a very ad hoc way. There's no formal framework for science, for incorporating science into decision-making process. So I want to see this is a science-based decision-making process. The bottom panel is a kind of more recent decision-making kind of protocol here. Is in a pilot TAC project, and we can see that the very explicitly in that process, the scientists and industry representatives are formally involved in the decision-making process, and there are consultation, stakeholder engagement, involvement, And this is certainly a huge improvement towards a science-based and more transparent decision-making process. So I will let Yunzhou take it over from here. Yunzhou, next slide. And it's your turn.
Yeah, thanks, Yang. So I'm gonna follow on Yang's talk about this formal process of engaging different stakeholders, especially the experts and policymakers in this mechanism of policymaking for China's management. And next, I'm gonna talk about two research platforms that are informally contributing to the policymaking process. So the first is called Marine Fisheries Partnership, MFP. And MFP was launched by a group of fishery scientists, managers, and NGOs in China and the US. And the aim of MFP is to really connect people who are involved in the sector of marine fisheries management, and also create this platform for people to share and exchange, generate knowledge of best practices for fisheries management. And on top of these organizations that have been, engaging with NFP, actually many policymakers in China, including those who are in charge of development and enforcement of policies, have been actively involved in these processes. For example, since 2017, NRDC and MFP have been organizing a series of study tours to US and EU. And the idea behind this study tour is to, bring these policymakers to different countries, and also create this platform to create this roundtable conversations with these policymakers at different countries. And they visit like local fishing ports, and also have these roundtable discussions with these managers, also the fishing cooperatives. And you can see these smiling faces in the photos showing that they are pretty happy with the study tour. And also the most important thing about the study tour is that most of the topics was selected by these policymakers. So this means that they have a strong interest to learn how different countries manage fisheries, especially how they deal with the challenges that they care and they want to improve. And the other platform I want to talk about is China Fisheries Learning Network. Well, this one is more focused in China, and you can see we have more than 180 members from different organizations. And these members are fishery managers, scientists, and NGOs in China. And this network was established in 2020 during the pandemic, but we still want to create this virtual platform so people can share their knowledge and also have this opportunity to collaborate with each other, especially across the boundaries in disciplines. So we develop a lot of virtual activities to engage with different stakeholders and members, such as newsletters, webinars, and also we have virtual workshops. So back to our project, the key phases, as you can see in China's fisheries policy making, are learning from international experiences and also, engage with experts to learn about their opinions about implementation of policies. So to make sure that our project is designed, is aligned to the policy needs and our outcomes can be really fit into this unique characteristics of China's policy making processes, we developed 4 approaches. The first, we are going to review methods and approaches that have been used in other places to assess climate and fisheries vulnerability. So that means we're gonna look at how other countries develop indicators and how they engage with different stakeholders. And then we are also looking at how different countries develop their adaptation strategies. And also we will prioritize and tailor these options based on our findings and the results. And next, we're going to reach out to the experts and key stakeholders for the opinions. And I'm going to talk more about this part in the next few slides. And finally, we have this group of advisory committee members. So they will provide a lot of feedback and input during the processes of this project. So this is a very brief illustration of how our project will be aligned to the policy structure. But I'm gonna stop here to see if we have questions so far. I'll hand it back to Kayla.
Thanks, Yunzhou. We actually don't have any questions right now, but that's a good reminder for people who are attending the webinar. If you do have questions at any point during the presentation, feel free to pop them into that Q&A box, and I'll keep track of those, and I can read those aloud. But thank you both to you, Yong and Yunzhou, for explaining a little bit more about like the background of fisheries management in China. I thought it was really interesting as I was reading through your grant proposal, all the ways that you have incorporated aligning your project, designing your project so that it can be linked to decision making in the end. That's something really exciting to see, which again is going to help the results be useful to people at the end. And Yunzhou, I was wondering if you could expand a little bit more on the key milestones of this project. You know, how are you using the information that you collect at each step during these key milestones to inform the next one?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kayla. So basically, we have three key milestones for the project. And overall, the methodology will be evolving over time because the project is designed to build on new information comes in at each of the milestones. But the bottom line is that we are going to address these key questions that Yang just mentioned and will deliver these messages to policymakers. And also for each of these phase, we will have the advisory committee provide feedback, and we will engage with different stakeholders and experts throughout these two platforms. And finally, we hope to generate some useful outcomes and pass on these messages to the key audiences through a variety of outreach plans. And we will publish papers based on those findings from these three phases. And also the most important findings will be distilled into a summary white paper that will be widely available for all the stakeholders, especially the policymakers. And we will have workshops, webinars, and present our findings at scientific and policy meetings. So for the first phase, project scoping and indicator selection, the reason we want to put this as the first step because as we started to review the methodologies and studies around the climate vulnerability on marine fisheries sector, we find that many studies are using very different methods, indicators. So there are also some papers discussing the potential impact of methodological choices on the results and further, creating different conclusions for policy making and creating the barrier for international comparisons and cooperations. So for this project, we really want to identify a collection of frameworks and indicators that have been used in previous studies. And we want to cover both ecological and socioeconomic dimensions of vulnerability to reflect these dynamics of social-ecological components in the fishery system. And then we're going to identify patterns, trends, and gaps in methodology and use that as a foundation for our justification of indicator choice for the project. And following on that, we are going to perform a national scale socio-ecological vulnerability assessment. And as you can see, we have two approaches here. The first approach will be similar to some previous studies that will be based on empirical data. And also we're using some the indicators that have been selected from the phase 1 to collect some data for the measurement of these indicators. For example, climate change from exposure, biological sensitivity and recovery potential, socioeconomic sensitivity and adaptive capacity. And based on this information, we're going to identify which fisheries and which areas are most vulnerable. And for the second approach, this will be a very interesting part of this project because Yang also mentioned that many decision-making in the past of fisheries management in China are largely dependent on expert knowledge. For example, people are using the expert opinion to determine the season of closure for fisheries and also the boundaries for the marine reserves. But the expert knowledge has not been really evaluated about their efficacy or their accuracy to support the policy making. For this project, we want to use this information as the reference to compare the results with those from the empirical database approach. So with that, we are going to identify experts through the 2 research platforms. And then we're going to have a survey to collect information about their perceptions about fisheries vulnerability. And then we're going to identify knowledge gaps by assessing the results from these 2 approaches, and also to identify potential drivers of knowledge gaps and therefore provide implications for future application. And the last milestone will be have case study of target fisheries. And this one will be also building on the results from the national scale vulnerability assessment. So that means we're going to select the top most vulnerable fisheries from the national scale assessment. And at the same time, we're going to incorporate other input and suggestions from the advisory committee. For example, we're going to consider whether the fisheries selected will be representative, or if we have sufficient data to support assessment. And based on all these criteria and information, we're going to identify the representative case study fisheries for in-depth analysis. And this case study will be different from the national scale assessment, which will be hard to incorporate some local scale detailed information. So for this case study, we're going to incorporate local knowledge and perceptions into the assessment. Specifically, we are going to collect information like how the local fishers perceive the climate change, the environmental changes, and whether there's any changes in their fishing behaviors, the fishing grounds, and also they have any concerns, any options, any strategies to deal with the climate change. And then we're going to propose adaptation strategies based on the review of how other countries deal with this climate change issue. And finally, we hope to use this as an opportunity to develop a pilot fishery, because this mechanism has been really effective and useful for China to make a standard for the policy implementation. So we think it will be really great to have this opportunity, this information to build up such a pilot fishery for adaptation policy implementation. I think that's it for the methodology. I'll hand it back to Kayla.
Awesome, thank you. That was a great, I love that first slide that you had that sort of breaks down the project and all the different milestones and how they're going to be building on each other. That was really great to see. So thanks for explaining some of those steps in more detail. We actually got a question in the Q&A, but my colleague Emily already answered it. It was talking about outreach around this project. And this is, something that we like to call a launch webinar. So this is happening at the very beginning of the project. And we certainly, our plan is to continue outreach around this project throughout the life of the project. There might be webinars. We'll definitely put out updates when there's new papers and results that come out. So I wanted to mention that there, but it's also a really good lead into the last part of, this presentation. I really want to wrap up and ask about engagement with managers and stakeholders. So it's one thing to do a presentation like this and a webinar and just tell people about the research, but it's a whole nother thing to do engagement with managers and the people who are going to actually be using this information. And also to design it so that it can be useful for those people. So can you share more on how you plan to interact with these different audiences throughout the project so that it can sort of foster uptake of these results when they finally do come out?
Yeah, so before getting into these details about outreach plans, I think I want to emphasize that, China is building this momentum to incorporate climate considerations in decision making for, ocean management, marine conservation, but there's still a knowledge gap and policy gap for the fisheries. So I think the key mission of this project is really to, communicate and engage these findings to these policy makers and other stakeholders. Therefore, we develop a portfolio of outreach plans. First, we want to share our results through the advisory committee, since many of them have strong connections with policymakers at the central and provincial levels. And also we have this really strong and effective research and outreach platforms, MFP and China Fisheries Learning Network. They have been really effective in performing well in terms of promoting knowledge sharing. And also some topics selected for the MFP study tours are really playing a key role in driving the implementation of recent policy making. For example, the TAC policy, the e-monitoring, and also the seafood traceability. So I think there will be a great opportunity to incorporate climate considerations in the future study tour topics. And finally, we will distill all the information, the important findings, including why this is an important issue, why we should incorporate climate change into the fisheries policy, and what are the priority options that we can take into this summary white paper that will be available for all stakeholders and policymakers. And finally, we will have workshops, hopefully in person, if the pandemic, see how pandemic goes, and also we can have webinars to update how this project goes. Yang, do you have anything to add on our outreach plans?
I think you covered everything, so I don't have anything additional.
Excellent. Thank you. That was really insightful. I think your white paper will be really helpful for this community, but also interesting to see how you distill all of the information you collect into that final product, because it's going to be a lot of information, a lot of useful information. So that's really exciting. As we wait for others to type in their questions, if they do have questions, I just wanted to remind everyone that we've been posting different links to papers as well as the project page and the project fact sheet for this specific project, which is in both English and Chinese. So we have those options available, but those are included in the chat box. And I just want to redirect people there so that they can have access to those resources as well. And I also just wanted to say a special thank you to Yunzhou and Yong for preparing this presentation and putting together all this information for us. I'm excited that this was recorded because I think it'll be really useful for all of your partners and counterparts in the audiences in China that weren't able to attend today, since it's about 3 a.m., I believe, in China right now. And I certainly would not want to get up that early to watch a webinar. But I think this is going to be a very useful resource moving forward. I don't see any questions in the chat box right now, but I do want to remind people that if you have additional questions or comments at the end of this presentation and we don't get to them, feel free to reach out to myself or Yunzhou and Yang after the webinar. I'll be sending a link to the recording and I'll copy both of the researchers in that recording or in that follow-up email. So please do reach out to us once you have that. So I'm not seeing any other questions. I think maybe your presentation was just so well informative that it was very clear, and we already answered one of the other questions on continuing outreach. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and we can end the webinar a little bit early. But any last comments, Yunzhou or Yong, that you want to point out or highlight for the audience here?
Do you want to go ahead?
I just want to say thank you for people attending this webinar. I saw some faces from China. It will be really early to, to attend this webinar. So just thank you a lot.
Yeah, I think it's great that it's recorded, so we can send it to relevant partners, working in China, and so they will not miss that. And I think it would be great to set up another webinar once we have more results. And this is just a kind of a kickoff seminar, so I suspect that we don't have a lot of report so far, but I think we're going to have more results coming in a few months. So hopefully we're going to talk that later.
Perfect. Yes, there will definitely be continuing outreach around this project and your results. All right. Well, with that, thank you again to our speakers and to those who attended. And I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.